Welcome to this forum. We are calling it the Public Energy Futures Forum, which is under the theme Reimagining Africa's Energy Future. So we are gathered to engage on a very vital dialogue about Africa's energy landscape and the pathways towards a brighter, greener, and more inclusive future. So our discussion will revolve around three core themes. I'm sure you have all had the emails and you have gone through what the themes of our discussions will be. One is going to be on the future of hydrocarbons versus the renewable energy. The next one will be about education for a sustainable energy transition. And the other one is going to be on an innovative financing for sustainable energy in Africa. So we are also joined online by online participants. We welcome you. Thank you so much for joining us. Please, we invite you to introduce yourselves on the chat button. You can introduce yourself, your organization or institution you're representing, and what your expectations for the forum is going to be at the end, and what you look to have achieved by the end of the forum. So we urge all our online participants to be very, very participative. Please feel free to share your ideas, your comments, your questions as the discussions are going on. We have Pasi Amayo maintaining and manning our online platform, and she'll be able to share your comments with the rest of us in the room, and also be able to respond to some of the questions that will be coming in through the online platform. Agenda, looking at what we're going to cover, I wanted us to do a quick introduction. Maybe we can stand up. I'm sorry, I'm going to ask as many times as possible for us to stand up. A very quick introduction, please. We're going to start with your name, your organization, what you do, very brief. And then you're going to tell us what your superpower is and why you chose that superpower. Yes, what superpower you would want to have in life. Okay? Are we together? Are we together? Can you hear me from the back? Okay, so my name is Emily Karanja. I work with Society for International Development under the Sustainable Energy Futures Program. My superpower would be super learning, whereby I can be able to grasp everything in a minute and be able, having beautiful and engaging conversations with anyone you meet in the world. So that would be my superpower. Maybe we can start there and then we can go there. Please, louder.
My name is Jerry Cole. I'm a consultant supporting the Shuri Research Advisors. My superpower would be time travel.
Time travel.
Okay.
My name is Tomi Yambo Dote. I work for a non-profit organization called Development Key Media. It's a media organization. My superpower would be the ability to put together all the information in the world and share it directly with the brains of everybody, especially to do with energy.
You and me can match. You can give me that knowledge. Okay, I want to do a host of things. So really my superpower would be that of optical science. So many people at the same time. Okay, thanks.
My name is Kevin Randik. I lead a consultancy firm called Branke Communications. My superpower will be the ability to talk communications across multiple sectors, like in this instance, energy, climate, tech, education, etc. It's a pleasure to be around. Thank you.
Thanks so much. My name is Paul Lomeri from Geothermal Development Company, and I deal with communities in the north and stakeholder engagement for renewable projects among the pastoralist groups. That superpower, I think, would be total recall. Think and remember everything that we planned and everything that we are going into in the futures. Thank you.
Part of the climate hub of the NGFP. I don't have to.
Hi everyone, my name is Iman Mashir. I am part of the NGFP Climate and Energy Futures Hub, and if I had a superpower, it would be the power to speak multiple languages. Actually, all the languages, all of them. Oh, apparently it still has. Go ahead, Amna.
Hi everyone, my name is Mutile. I am a Climate and Health Research Fellow, and my superpower would be to make everyone keep things tidy. Yeah.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
My name is Maimuna Kabatesi. I work at HIVOS for a program called Voices for Just Climate Action. And if I had a superpower, it would be the, innate talent to play all musical instruments.
Hi everyone, good evening. My name is Anne Songole. I work at Christian Aid as a senior advisor for climate and energy for Africa. If I had a superpower, it would be discernment, so that I could see what you're about and not go down that road.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
I'm Bob Aston from the Arid Lands Information Network. If I had a superpower, maybe my mind would be to have the ability to vanish when the need arises.
Good evening. My name is Innocent Nicholas from ICAS Institute. And if I had a superpower, it would be to ensure grassroots people are able to solve their own issues without me coming in.
Good evening, everyone. Collins Wood. I work for HIVOS. If I had a superpower, I would probably say maybe to run a marathon. Maybe, yeah, that would be something.
I'm Charles Wangogo, the NGFP Africa Energy Initiative. If I had a superpower, maybe to be travel hindsight. That's now.
Hi everyone, John Rivera here from the UN Functions and the Champions working in the energy sector, maybe for that. If I had a superpower, it would be probably like absorbing greenhouse gases in the atmosphere and emitting pure oxygen.
One greetings, everyone. I'm David Arenze. I'm a renewable energy specialist and I work for a non-governmental organization called Diamond Development Initiatives based in Nigeria. If I had a superpower, Africa would have been electrified years ago. So we're still alive. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
My name is Esther Gizenji. I'm a legal officer at Ofgen Limited and also a youth advocate. If I had a superpower, probably two. One, see into the future, and the other one would be to move around places that have beautiful nature. So waterfalls, wildlife, greenery, scenic places.
Hi, good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
My name is Rita Njeri Atunti, and I am an environmental scientist. I currently work with Solidaridad, that is Solidaridad East and Central Africa, and I help with the implementation of the extractives projects here in Kenya. And if I had a superpower, it would definitely be time-lapse, time travel, so that I can have the ability to sort of reverse some dangers, climate change, forest fires, and every other hazard that's currently happening. Yeah.
Hello everyone, I'm Sunita Elizabeth, a graduate research fellow under Energy and Climate Change at Stockholm Environment Institute. And if I had a superpower, then it would be to envision a better future in terms of communities that are well adapted to climate change and are connected, have access to energy by as early as 2025. Thank you.
Hi everybody, my name is Joachim Paul. I'm the director of the Nairobi office of the Heinrich Boll Foundation. And if I have a superpower, I'd like to be able to live in a completely natural world.
Hi everyone, my name is Frederick Zhao. I work with Joaquin at Heinrich Boll Foundation. I coordinate a program called Sustainable Development. Yes, always thought about time travel, but it has been mentioned by many people. So I'll go for speed now. So with my age catching up with me, so like speed.
Good evening, everyone. First of all, let me speak for the people who are online. They say they didn't hear the password, the Wi-Fi. So I really hope you are going to repeat it. You can also tell them that it may not assist them so much. My name is Engineer Isaac Nareva. I'm the Executive Director of the Electricity Consumer Society of Kenya. I'm also an energy auditor. I'm a billing analyst in Sub-Saharan Africa. I'm also a public noisemaker on billing issues. If I had this, what is in my head is too much about billing. To get people to know the whole 55 million Kenyans, to understand the issues around the billing, I would be very happy. But then, of course, the last one is the superpower to make sure that I win all arguments with my wife.
Yes, good evening. Good evening. I'm John Chomba. I'm the Finance Director of Electricity Consumer Society of Kenya. If I was head of superpower, I would wish to bring nuclear test so that I can continue my year. There are so many issues about energy that have not been so easily started.
Hi guys. I'm Rade, I'm a photographer, writer. And going by the drill, people are saying, if you had any superpowers. If I had any superpower, I link energy with it.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Dovanage. I'm a poet and a performing artist. And if I had a superpower, probably I wish people were more, I would make people more receptive to, positive change. I feel like sometimes it takes too long for important things to sink in. So, that would be my thank you.
Hi everybody, my name is Pasi Amayo. I'm with the Society for International Development. If I had a superpower, it would be to plant a fruit forest everywhere in 1 week for the purpose of obviously increasing forest cover everywhere, and also to have so many fruits to feed ourselves, all that sugar that comes from the natural world. I feel like that's what I would do if I had a superpower. Thank you.
I think there's one here. You've not introduced yourself.
Hello. Nashifai Faye. I'm a junior student at Kenyatta University. And if I'd have a superpower, it would be create gender equality starting from right now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Consider very interesting perspective. I didn't hear anyone talking about money. Would you guys like money? Love money? No one wants to get money. Anyway, just to move on to the next aspect. I want us to have an introduction, kind of a performance. I'm going to introduce Dofane to do a presentation. Kindly, this is a very timely conversation because we have just lost power. And the generator is just coming on, so it's picking up back. See, I knew it was coming back. So I want to introduce Dofane to do a presentation as we start, and then we'll do an agenda, kind of going through the agenda, and then we can continue with the rest of the program. Welcome, Dofane.
Everybody can hear me. I think I would start because I want to believe that these are a very expert kind of audience. So I'm gonna be the artist in the room and try and bring us back to earth, you know, try and humanize the conversation a little. If there's a group of people that that really like highlight this conversation from a human point of view, I think it's women, and especially African women. I was brought up by my grandmother, and for the longest time, you know, we used firewood, you know, like and charcoal. Until recently, you know, it's when people started using gas. Right now, actually, last year, my grandmother, you know, finally got to, you know, establish like a biogas, you know, in a homestead, and that is a more efficient way in which energy can be used, you know, and produced, and not just in efficiency in terms of energy itself, but even in terms of the cost. And so I'm going to tell a story about my grandmother, because there's a lot we can learn from our grandmothers and women in general. My grandmother has a ritual. Each time I travel to the countryside, she unlocks her granary and packs a bag of groceries for my return. She does this for my 3 cousins, all my distant relatives, and for each visiting guest. In test, I always make an attempt to decline, but she's ever intent in keeping this olden tradition. Iriobi ya kungana. Antire kaweta kolero impara Nairobi. There is more than enough here, and I will not have you starving in the city. In December 2022, my visit came on the wake of a 3-year-long drought, the worst in her 70+ years of living. I could tell of the empty racks in her store by the fact that she didn't bother to lock the door. And as sad as that was, a part of me was glad that this time she will not have to trouble herself. This time she won't have to raid her stock to aid my costly lonesome existence in a rented city flat. But on the eve of my departure, she looked from across the table and said, I sent a boda to buy you some potatoes and tomatoes from the market. Aware of the futility of my efforts, I tried to air my objection, but a defeated smile is all I could muster when she added, you need the food much more than I need the money. I've been thinking about that a lot. How the world needs people like my grandmother. How I've learned to value people from my grandmother. How her seemingly misplaced tradition could possibly be the vision for our future, with the signs signaling of dire days and science warning of a much warming globe. My grandmother's ritual is like a breath of fresh air, a gust of moist winds floating over bare arid plains, eager for restoration. Whatever the cost, she's glad to pay. Like a distant seasonal storm flooding a desolate riverbed, my grandmother's ritual summons our collective sense with each visit. Perhaps to remind us that no grain of soil, however rich and fertile, is enough on its own. Or perhaps through our relentless efforts to keep a scattered community together, to teach us that no challenge is insurmountable. Sometimes all you need is a familiar tradition and a barn packed with groceries. And maybe, just maybe, a little money in your pockets. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nofan, for that inspiring spoken word. It brings out, there's something about art that just brings out some sort of, we might sit and talk in technicalities, but when the art is introduced to the room in some, information comes in terms of art, it gets to be absorbed better. So I want us to go through the agenda for today. We all have the agenda on our tables. So we've already started. So I'm going to start from the opening. We will have opening remarks from the SEED Regional Office for Africa, and also from our partners, the Heinrich Boll Foundation. Then we'll move on to the panel setting, where we'll have the discussions of the 3 themes of the day. Then we'll have another we'll have a plenary discussion after the panel discussion. Then we'll have another special performance by Dolphin. And then we'll have the visioning exercise, which is going to be led by the NGFP Foresight Practitioners, looking at using foresight and futures tools. Then we'll have another special performance from Jules' poetry, a snapshot of the Africa's future, then go back to reporting from what the groups had discussed, and then we'll close with closing remarks and a vote of thanks. So just to start on the program, I want to welcome Pasi Amayo, the SEED Regional Office for Africa Program Manager for the Sustainable Energy Futures Program, to do her opening remarks, and also introduce the Heinrich Boll Foundation partners to do their opening remarks. Pasi Amayo.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. We're really, really sorry we started late, but it's understandable, traffic. So my name is Pasi Amayo. I am the Program Manager for Sustainable Energy Futures Program at the SEED Regional Office for Africa. And because of time, I just want to quickly welcome you all. This is our public Energy Futures Forum that allows us to interact with the public and people, experts, leaders who are not necessarily always with us, especially when we're having our energy reference group convenings. We're very proud and happy that we have had this project running since 2016. We began by building scenarios for Eastern Africa when it comes to what the future of the energy sector might look like in the Eastern African region. We're also proud to announce that we have been able to scale up this work to include Southern Africa. So soon we will be doing energy scenarios for Southern Africa. And it was a great pleasure that I would like to thank our partners over the past couple of years, since 2016, the Heinrich Boll Foundation, who have made it possible for us to not only build scenarios for the energy system, and the very first institution to build such scenarios for the African continent, but also to do a lot of extensive research with our members in Kenya and in other regions. But beyond just the research and knowledge development, we have also been able to have conversations such as this, to include missing voices, to add new perspectives into the discussions that we have, and we're looking forward to having these discussions have a wider impact as we all hope for a sustainable energy future, at least by 2030 and beyond. So with these very few remarks, I'd like to welcome our partners, the Heinrich Boll Foundation representatives. I think I'm gonna call Paul to come, or both of you, because now you're both here, to just open some for us, and we will go into the discussion.
So we are doing a duet. Thank you. Oh, thank you very much. Like I mentioned, my name is Frederick. I have been on this journey with SID since 2016. So I know the ups and downs of energy discussion since we had them in 2016. Developing the scenarios, the challenges that we had, crisscrossing in Tanzania, Uganda, and we did part of Ethiopia also. So it has been a great journey. And even to have this conversation, to have you in the room today. I'm eager today also to learn about what we do with our hydrocarbons. Thank you, Charles, we're here. Very eager to hear about what we can do about our, education, instill some of these values, also some of the things that encompasses energy into our education system, so that we can think about the future, and finally about how do we finance all these things that we talk about, how do we deal with new technologies that are coming up, for example, like green hydrogen. You need to be prepared for that also. So thank you for having you in the room, and we're happy as HBS to welcome you here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fred. My name is Joachim. As I said in the introduction round, I'm here since 2 years directing the Heinrich Boll Stiftung's Nairobi office. I don't have the long experience, especially also in the cooperation with our partners SID, and the particular project and the publication. One of it you see in front of you on the tables. I also like to encourage all of you who have not seen it to have a look at the publication or on our websites or SID websites, or actually the printed one. So what a timely event this is after the Africa Climate Summit, after climate, alternative energy, green hydrogen, etc., 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 became basically the global talk after the UN, I think a few days ago, warned that the global climate breakdown actually began, that this year is the hottest year in recorded history. I don't want to be too dystopic or too negative towards the future. We have those time travelers. Maybe in the break they can give us some ideas of what they see a few years from now. Now, I think these are very important discussions. We hope we will be able, with all of you here, to spread important messages. It's a civil society meeting. Alternative energy, green future became the talk of mainstream politics. So what does this mean? What can we contribute to that? I'm eager to listen to you and to understand from your views, and wish you all and us a productive meeting. I see, and I'm very happy to see my other colleagues from our office who just arrived now. Thank you for being with us, and thanks Pasi and Emily and SID for organizing this and having us here.
Thank you.
So thank you so much for those opening remarks. So I want us to go straight to the discussion now, and I'm going to introduce and welcome Iman Bashir, who is going to take us through the panel discussion. Please, Iman, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for coming tonight. Very excited to have all of you with us. Just conscious of time, I'm just going to go right into the panel discussion and invite the panelists. Before I do that, just a quick introduction. My name is Iman Bashir. I'm part of the NGFP Climate and Energy Futures Hub. I'm an environmental lawyer focusing on climate and energy issues. I'm based here in Nairobi, so karibu sana, everyone who's here for the summit and the Africa Climate Week. So I am excited to welcome a very wonderful panel who I'm going to introduce as they come up here. I'll start with Charles Wangoho, who is NZ Ijayo Africa Energy Initiative founder. Welcome, karibu sana. Go ahead and have a seat. Thank you for coming tonight. Secondly, I'd like to invite Ibrahim Jabri, who is the renewable energy lead at the Climate Champions. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a seat. Third, I'd like to invite Esther Githinji, who is a legal officer at Ofgen, as well as an IACT peer educator. Karibu sana. I'd also like to welcome David Arinze, who is a global focal point for SDG 7 Youth Constituency. I'd also like to invite Collins Otieno, who is the Climate Finance Officer at HIVOS. Welcome. Lastly, but not least, I'd like to invite Anne Songole, who is the Senior Climate Change and Energy Advisor for Africa at Christian Aid. Welcome, Anne. Amazing. Thank you all for joining me here, and thank you all for coming to listen to the panel speak. This is a very wonderful and diverse panel that has a lot of experience in energy issues, but since we're here to discuss energy issues comprehensively, we're not just focusing on the energy technicalities. We're looking at energy as an ecosystem. We're looking at the future exploration of hydrocarbons versus investment in renewable energy in Africa. We're also looking at education for sustainable energy transition in Africa, and we're also looking at the finance aspect of it. We know to finance the energy transition is a key component of energy issues in Africa. And so without further ado, I'll get started. I'll just ask each of you a question as we go through. And then there's microphones in front of you, just pick one up and answer. So I'll start with you, Charles. My first question to you is that in light of global trends towards cleaner energy, how can East Africa strategically place itself as an economic front for investment in renewables while ensuring its own stability in terms of energy?
Thank you, Iman, for that. I think in East Africa, the advantage we have, so for countries like Kenya and Ethiopia, is that we already happen to be sort of very advanced in terms of renewable energy. And so therefore for our countries to set up themselves as green industrial hubs, which is what everyone is trying to aim towards, there's an opportunity there. And I think this whole week, and I don't want to start repeating the stats that have been thrown at each and every meeting this week around Africa's renewable energy, whether it's wind, geothermal, or solar. But basically there's an opportunity there, and I think the point there is around how do you attract the investment to enable us to become that green industrial hub. And for me, what's more important is that to use that opportunity also to increase energy access. And so therefore, at the moment, one challenge we have in Kenya is that our grid is becoming increasingly very domestic. And so the impact of that is that it's also becoming very expensive. So the more the bigger industry players pull out of the grid, the more expensive our hub becomes, our grid becomes, and that is leading to challenges also in terms of increasing energy access, because energy access, one of the issues around energy access is the affordability question. And so if you're able to attract the right industry to actually expand our renewable energy, then we'll be able to also sort of pass on those benefits in terms of increasing energy access. The second thing is that when we look at the opportunity now, given the climate crisis, is that we are looking at an opportunity in terms of reversing extraction trends. So in our hydrocarbons, majority of it is always, the thought has always been export-oriented. So the finds in Turkana were going to be, build a pipeline to the coast to get them out to market. So with this, there's an opportunity to reverse that trend in terms of what we are saying is, let's develop the hubs within our countries and then be able to build an industrial base from that. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those wonderful words. I feel like you have set the groundwork perfectly for us. I'll move on to Ibrahim Jabri. If you have any questions, please just note them down, as well as if you have any questions from our digital audience, just put them in the chat and they'll be forwarded to the panel. So my question to Jabri is, how can the experiences and lessons learned from other regions be applied to Africa's unique challenges and opportunities in transitioning away from hydrocarbons?
Thanks, Iman. Good questions. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us at this Graveyard Shift post-ACS event. And I must apologize in advance because I did ask Pasi and the team if I could do a slide deck. I know it's almost 7 p.m., but this is a very interesting deck and it's visual. And if you can bear with me, I think it's very thought-stimulating. And I could also send to anyone in the audience who wants. So I just wanted everyone, when we're discussing Africa's energy sector, and if we zoom in Africa, if you look at that tweet, it says that one steel plant in China powered by coal
generator that produces the electricity, it has 5.1 gigawatts of generation capacity. That is one factory in China. Is almost double the amount of generation capacity all of Kenya has, 3.1 gigawatts. Sometimes we don't even reach 3 gigawatts. So 53 million people in Kenya have less than 3 gigawatts, and one factory in China has 5.1 gigawatts. So it brings a lot of perspective when we discuss energy needs in Africa and energy access, because as you know, 600 million people in Africa don't have any sort of electricity, even coal generation electricity. So I just like this tweet because it brings perspective, especially when we start criticizing Africa for power generation emissions. And then, I think next slide. This one, I'm not going to go through all of this, it's a lot of words, but maybe the last one, which we can't see, I'll just talk about number 5 and 6, but obviously all of it is important. In terms of our perspective, Africa discusses a lot about the role of gas as a transition fuel, and if you're in the energy sector, you obviously, or even in the climate sector, you discuss this a lot, and there's a lot of civil society talking about Don't Gas Africa, but a lot of project developers know about the essential, or not the essential, but maybe the near-term important role of gas. But what the science tells us is that if Africa's electricity consumption tripled and we needed 3 times as much electricity tomorrow, and if we were to get all of that electricity using gas, so that would mean gas to power plants, that additional uptake of generation capacity would only be 0.6% of global emissions. So obviously there's a lot of what I call emissions panic about the projected emissions Africa might have, because of obviously during the days of the Kyoto Protocol, no one knew China would emit as much, so a lot of global north countries are terrified that Africa will then emit as much as what China is emitting. And then the last one, I keep talking about China, but it's important when we compare Africa and China, is that China installed 100 gigawatts of new solar in 1 year. That 1 year is 10 times amount of, you can't see it there, but it says 11 gigawatts that Africa has. So in 1 year, they did 100. All we've ever done is 11. So then it brings perspective, and then you say Africa needs to decarbonize, but we only have 11, and they have 100 gigawatts. So you can imagine what they're doing with coal, if that is what they're doing with solar. So then there's all this discussion, Africa needs to decarbonize, which is important. Every region needs to decarbonize, and this is not a pro-fossil fuel slide deck, it's a perspective slide deck. But if we are asking Africa to decarbonize, then we need to put the money where the climate agenda is. So the global north, this is where the globe gets its capital from. We get our money for any project from the global north that funds the World Bank and our DFIs. That money is going for clean energy investment. It's going to advanced economies and China. Everyone, if you're not an advanced economy and you're not in China, you're put in that small 10%, every other global south country getting 10% of all investment between 2018 and 2023. So the money is not coming to us to invest in clean power, and we're not even at the generation capacity that other economies have. And then we're told solar is cheap. But is it really? Depends where. Solar is very cheap in Australia. Is solar cheap in Africa? Sometimes, sometimes not. It could be cheap in South Africa, Egypt, North America, but a lot of sub-Saharan countries are subject, especially privately financed power projects are squeezed because of the interest rates, because renewable energy projects have an initial capex, the capital expenditure that it takes to first build a huge wind and solar plant is so big that when you're first hit by that high interest rate, it hits you harder as a solar plant than any gas, oil. I don't know about coal. Coal I don't touch a lot, but this is the kind of perspective. So if you look at that interest rate effects on energy cost, the highest one is utility solar and storage. If you don't have storage, it's still high. Then land-based wind. Then the least hit is combined cycle gas. This is still not a case for gas. It is just the reality. I'm making a case on how to enable renewables, because currently renewables are fighting a losing battle in Africa. Obviously, we are very pro solar and wind and geothermal. Let me just try to go to the next one. Okay, so I know I said 2 minutes. I think I'm out of time, but let me just go through this. I'll skip the middle one, but the main problem in Africa is the cost of capital. Everything in Africa is very expensive. To build any sort of project, it's not even in the energy sector, it's expensive because of maybe real, but a lot of it is perceived risk. Every investor perceives Africa as a risky investment region. Therefore, they put a lot of this costs because they hedge the investment, and the dollar is rising and we're paying back in local currency. All these things were not set to succeed because the risk premiums are way high and they're hiking the capital cost. And then the other one is the emissions panic that I talk about. 30 seconds, maybe I just see the biggest. Let me just talk about then, Iman, the last point there. I'm making a case of how to go away from private sector finance to public development finance, because I like this quote. It says, what's another name for blended finance, concessional capital, credit enhancement, green bonds, blah, blah, blah. To drive costs down into underserved markets, it's subsidies. No one wants to talk about subsidies, but that's what it takes to seed the clean energy future. And then there's a lot more slides, but if you could scan that, you could get a memo I wrote, which I think is good. So thank you so much for bearing with me.
Wow, thank you so much for that very comprehensive foundation. I think two things that stood out to me was when people say Africa should decarbonize, Jabri asks, decarbonize what? When people say that Africa should invest in renewable energy, he says, invest what? So those are two very important questions that I think he's posed to us for us to think about as we go through. I think we'll shift a bit to talk about education, because education is part and parcel of the energy transition on the continent. And with that, I'll invite Esther. And to you, I ask the question, what role does education in different levels play in advancing sustainable energy transitions in Africa? If you could speak about that, please.
Thank you, Man, and thank you for SID for having us. Pleased to be here. Education is very important and plays a crucial role in each and every step, especially when it's inducted at early stages of education. A study by UNESCO shows that 95% of secondary and primary school teachers really think that teaching on sustainable energy and climate change is quite important. When we give education, it's able to change attitudes towards the SDG 7 and the SDG 13. And also just to note that education is part of the SDG, which is SDG 4. And one of the targets for SDG 4 on quality education is to ensure effective learning and the acquisition of relevant knowledge, skills, and competence. So in developing this through each and every stage, whether it's the primary school level, the secondary school level, and the tertiary level, it's very important. We are able to educate, we are able to empower, and when you're able to empower them, people are able to engage and interact with this, with sustainable energy development. Just to speak briefly about some of the activities that I do and some of the organizations that I do work for with regards to education. I'm part of the IRENA I-ACT peer educator, where we are empowering youth with basic information on renewable energy and climate change to enable them to effectively communicate. This can also be taught to secondary schools. I also part of the Youth Task Force for the Rest for Africa Foundation, which has a microgrid academy and gives technical courses for people who are still in university and people who are done with university, and gives them practical tools with regards to engaging with solar energy and other areas of renewable energy. So like I said, education is quite important. When you educate, people are able to engage and people are empowered. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Esther. She said we start educating young people as early as possible, and this continues throughout the process, and we continue to build that capacity. And speaking of young people, David, I know you are a huge champion for youth, right? I want to ask you to build on what Esther just said and speak from the youth perspective, because I know you're an SDG champion. With that voice, how do you see SDGs playing a role in influencing the education sector, particularly for young people, to prioritize sustainable energy topics?
Thank you, Iman, for the question. Warm greetings again, everyone. Such a delight to be here. You know, when you look at the young age bracket, you know, when you look at young people serving the space, they're either students, early career professionals, or even entrepreneurs. And across these categories have various education gaps that need to be filled. We had, at the session earlier today, we had a debate whether SDG 7 is more important than SDG 13, or which SDG is much more important than the other. But I would like to say that when you try to achieve energy access, you're trying to literally achieve the SDGs. And I'll tell you why. For so many reasons, you can't have better healthcare without access to relevant energy supply. You can have better education. You can have greater industries. And the list goes on. And now as we try to think about the role of education across these categories, you see that it's the students that are going to feed the workforce, either serving as professionals who work with various energy companies or institutions. You have entrepreneurs today who have created an invention, or that came as a result of knowledge and learning. And so when we look at all of these things, it's critical that we see that we begin to look at these different categories. There's no one size fits all. How can we strengthen these stakeholders or the youths that are playing across these categories for better impact? For example, when it comes to an entrepreneur needs relevant financing. Like you earlier introduced me, I'm a youth at heart, and I'm the global focal point for SDG 7. But also, I work as the program officer of green energy at Diamond Development Initiatives. We're implementing partners for the United States African Development Foundation in Nigeria, and we fund clean energy businesses. We've seen companies grow from early stage businesses who may have received $100,000, for example, to build a pilot project in a bankable manner. And in 3-4 years, through relevant hand-holding support, these companies have become multi-million-dollar companies. Energy is a business, and it must be paid for. And so, as we try to think around education across each strata, we need to think about the fact that whatever it is that we're doing, we are feeding a bankable and economically viable process, right? And so, on the subject of education and youth participation, we just need to be very, very deliberate about ensuring that we create. Esther talked about the I-Act 2. That is one of them, because it was targeting a specific category of youth who are playing in a particular sector. We would have youth playing as entrepreneurs. We'll have youth playing as early career and mid-stage career professionals who are playing critical roles, who need capacity building to be able to drive the sector and able to ensure that we structure deals better. We structure the sector better. We have better policies. You see that even Jabri's presentation, he talked about taxes. Till today, I tell you that some countries are hesitant on removing taxes on the importation of equipment, and this goes ahead to increase the landing cost to the consumer. How do you expect people to jump on a technology that they don't have the capacity to pay for? How do we expect in Africa to be able to ensure that we transition in an equitable manner when most of the equipment that we need are coming from outside the shores of the country, of the continent? So we need to, as we think about this subject, because it's every stakeholder or every part of the value chain has a role to play. But as we think around this, we need to be very clear and deliberate. Africa needs to be intentional. There has to be capacity building across board in the education space, in the vocational space, across board, even in the business school or business teaching space, that all of this needs to come from within the continent, and it needs to make sense economically. Then can we begin to see some real change happen? We can have PV manufacturing companies in Kenya. We can have wind manufacturing companies in Kenya. You see, most countries play to the quality and the quantity of the renewable energy sources that are playing in their countries. For example, I am from Nigeria. We're very big on solar. But so today we have over 100 million people who have access to electricity, we only have one company that manufactures solar panels in the country. So you can imagine the gap that exists, but also presents a huge business potential for us to leverage. I'll pause here. Thank you.
Amazing intervention, David. You have made a wonderful argument for the youth that they are already doing these things. They just need the capacity to be built. They need a bit of support. They need the countries, and they need finances, which is very important. And that's an amazing segue into the finance topic, because we've had Charles and Jabri talk to us about make an argument for renewable energy over fossil fuels. We've had David and Esther talk about why it's important to educate the community, particularly young people, on energy issues. And now let's talk about how to finance all of this wonderful, amazing ideas. How do we fund this? I'll start with you, Anne. Anne, you have a focus on gender issues. And I think when we talk about financing, a lot of communities are locked out, a lot of sections of the communities are locked out, young people, like David mentioned, and women and children. So how do gender justice and economic justice intersect in the arena of sustainable energy financing in Africa? Would be the question I would pose to you. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much, and thank you to the panelists who've spoken before me. So, just to quickly say that I work at Christian Aid, and some of the values that we have are dignity, justice, equality, and love. And the three key areas that we look at are power, prophetic voice, and poverty. So we're challenging those inequalities. And so just based on that, it means that we're looking at, the marginal communities. We're looking at, for instance, last mile communities, and we're also looking at people who are at risk of being left behind when most of us, move forward, when SDG 7 is being achieved, SDG 13 and the like. And so for me, I think it's important to make the case for energy as a public good. Number one, there's a worrying foundation, of course, that was set at the summit, on how Africa, Kenya is a place to extract from, Africa is a place to extract from. So that's, I think, a worrying aspect of thinking about energy as a public good, because then it would mean that you're taking away more than you're giving, or whatever it is that you're giving does not align with what we need to receive. And so that's the first thing that I would like to say. And the second is our focus is really looking at public finance and multilateral development banks. And so an important aspect, maybe some of the gaps that we see sometimes with some of these banks is they have gender strategies, they have energy strategies, and they have, policies and the like. But one of the challenges that we're seeing is that a lot, for instance, like the African Development Bank, their entire strategy, the country strategy paper is really based on the country integrated development plans for the different countries across Africa. So what that would mean is that if you're not involved in the process of developing the CIDP, then you would really want be part of the CSP development. Then the other thing I think that's useful to note is that like right now, the strategy for the bank, for the Africa Development Bank, has come to an end, the High Five strategy, and they're reviewing it. But we're seeing, even during the summit, about 426 million promised through the climate action window, part of the replenishment of the African Development Fund. And so what is this anchored on? The bank also doesn't have the energy policy. The bank doesn't have an energy policy that's updated. So what that would mean is that, because some of these documents, a lot of times civil society, women's rights groups, and a number of organizations would come to the bank and tell them, this is how we feel the energy should be provided if we want to provide it as a public good. And if that has not happened, then that would mean that the way they are positioning a lot of the investments that come is not the might not particularly be as inclusive. Then the other thing I want to say that's important is that, you know, women and youth are usually the early adopters of technologies, be it clean cooking, be it, you know, coming up with a number of innovations. It would be them that would you know, they would take them up quickly. And so if then the focus, for instance, you could see during the AU Innovation Stand at the summit, you'd see an innovator who just needs like 50,000 to scale a 3 megawatt wind turbine to 15 megawatts. So what does that tell you? And you see the initiatives like the Africa Adaptation Initiative, or, you know, just some, but how do you access some of this funding? So I think there's a need to kind of bridge that gap between access and also, and especially for smaller entities. And just another thing, the profit motive. It's important for us to also note that the many companies would prefer to do large-scale projects. Many private enterprises would prefer to do large-scale projects, and possibly those that would be connected to the grid, because it makes economic sense for them. So it's up to us now to think about how this energy should look like, and how they should be positioned, so that it doesn't come down to us that we're paying so much for electricity when, you know, there's so much capacity and the cost can really go lower, but, you know, we are stuck with certain kind of imperatives based on just some motives. And so even with the deals that have been made, the 23 billion, it's important for us to kind of look at it and think about how we can push back against some of these motives. And I think this is the role that a lot of communities and private sectors, communities and civil society and CBOs play. And it's important for them to be part of co-creation and not necessarily being told this is the technology that you should use. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I hope you can hear me. Yeah, that was wonderful. And I think there's a few things that stood out to me that I want to reiterate for the room. She said that there's a lot of gaps in, sometimes there's a policy, or it's on paper, but it doesn't exist in real life, or it's not being implemented. And also sometimes finance or the money may be available, may exist, but it's difficult for some people to access it, especially if they are on the fringes of society. And also I want to bring up a sentence that was very interesting compared to a sentence David made earlier, and maybe as we go around one more time, you can address it. Anne said, energy is a public good, and David said, energy is a business. So I think as we go around, maybe each of you can maybe support your statements and let us know why you take that stance and how to go about it. Now I'll go back to Collins now. I'll bring you in to talk about the money side of things. What innovative financial strategies can Africa employ to attract international funding for its sustainable energy transition? Can you go ahead and answer that for us, please? It's a very pertinent question.
Thank you so much, Iman, and thank you to the rest of the panelists that have spoken before me. I think next time I'm borrowing a leaf from Jabri. He came with a deck. I'm bringing a deck next time, because I think there's too much to talk about. I'll take in from the last point that Anna's made regarding the issue of large-scale projects. He said large-scale projects really benefit much as opposed to small-scale projects in terms of scaling out, and therefore discouraging investment in this. And think that in itself just gives us a way to innovatively create a way to support small-scale businesses or energy ventures to be able to prosper. And that gives us a bit of an innovative way of creating finance around that, which is tax incentives. So that quickly helps to pull in some small-scale business ventures around energy systems. But other innovative financial strategies include equity funds, And equity funds basically are those that you find that a company such as Olkaria, for instance, will sell part of it to be able to raise certain funds to meet what they want to do in probably 5 or 6 or 10 years. There is equally a debt finance, which is, of course, borrowing. The critique behind it, I think I would hold that so that probably it comes in as a question. But I think it's good to put it out there that another innovative way of mobilizing finance for action around energy and renewable energy, for that matter, is debt finance. We equally have what we call guarantee finances, and guarantee finance are basically what the current generation calls de-risking private sector investment. How good it is, probably that comes in as a question for us to be able to tackle. I think the fourth probably innovative way to be able to mobilize finance for sustainable just energy transition could be what we call corporate or project finance, where it has both equity and debt finance. The only difference is that in the corporate side, there is a retainership in terms of the voting rights. Can I give an example? It confuses me also all the time. If you look at Olkaria, for instance, you do know that it's not 100% owned by the government, right? There's a private sector part of Olkaria. But the private sector part of Olkaria, while the government has the voting rights, the private sector also has a voting right. So that is what makes it a corporate project finance sort of instrument. The last but not least, and I'm not saying this list is exhaustive because I'm not going to talk about green bonds and the like. That's why I'm saying next time I'm carrying a slide deck. The last but not least, I think, for me is blended finance. And this is mostly probably perceived in the health sector, for instance. I will give that an example, where you find that there is a financing instrument that is going to the health sector, but to green the supply chain in the health sector, someone has like an energy transition in the health sector finance embedded into that. So I think those 6 liners, or 6 options of innovatively financing sustainable energy transition would probably suffice. But I think, again, looking at it from the perspective of what are the advantages and disadvantages and how do we probably package ourselves to go for one is quite important. Thank you.
Thank you so much for putting that very succinctly. I think just quick 1, 2, 3, I feel like it's very easy for us to remember. So thank you for giving us all these ways that Kenya and Africa can make itself very profitable, very marketable at an international level when it comes to finance in energy issues. Now, I keep being warned that we're running out of time, so I'll give all of you 1 minute each, and I'll time all of you to give me not only your closing remarks, and I'll give you just a prompt to sort of contextualize the conversation as we've been going along, because a lot of things have come up, a lot of your talking points have intersected with each other, because again, all of these issues do not live in a silo, they interconnect very thoroughly. So I'll start with you, Charles. So 1 minute to close up, and also talk to us about, well, just rerouting from what the last 2 panelists talked about at an international level, maybe bring it back to a local level, talk about what the local community can do, what the indigenous communities can do when it comes to the promotion of renewable energy over hydrocarbons. 1 minute, I am watching you.
I'll try to rush through, and I think the first thing to put ourselves, we have to put on the hat of a finance minister, and what's a worst case scenario going forward. So worst case scenario is that you start seeing money being diverted from development projects and sort of budgets like health to go towards hydrocarbon development. That's the first thing, right? In terms of worst case scenario. Second scenario is that African countries are taking advantage because of the transition, because of this rush to sort of be the last people who are producing. So you keep signing contracts that don't benefit countries. And then in terms of the worst case for the community is that this energy transition conversation also bypasses them. And so you have to ask the question, development for who? And I like SID in terms of energy for who. And so again, it's development for who. So if communities are not involved in that development, then what are we doing? Are we just creating, for example, a green hydrogen industry that's
Thank you so much for telling us how the local government and the local community can be involved in the transition process. Jabri, maybe you can tell us about the youth perspective, because I know a majority of your work is also within real youth engagement. In 1 minute, I'm watching the clock, it's 7:09, so 7:10, you should be done. Tell us about how to harness the youth passion, the youth energy in the transition process.
Oh, can I just answer the question that you had posed around if it's a business or a public good? I have a really good answer for that.
Sure.
Okay.
If
So
that's how you want to use your minute.
I want to use my 1 minute that way. Start now. So I think it depends with obviously this big issue, but I've written down here. So I think energy is a business for those privileged enough to pay for it and can't pay for it, but it's a right for those who need to be lifted out of poverty. So for example of this is the last mile, so the village that does not have electricity. That is not a profitable enterprise. You need to provide electricity for that village. But powering a major city like Nairobi is a business. So that is the perspective. So you can oversize renewable energy generation to provide it as a right and then sell it to consumers who can pay for it. Thanks.
Okay, since you have a bonus mark for answering another question, I'll give you 1 more minute to answer the initial question about youth engagement.
Youth engagement is obviously very important, and youth is a transient space, so not majority of us in the youth climate movement have now moved on, and we're leaving room for the future. But obviously, I think 3 big roles that youth play is obviously we are professional experts. A bunch of us provide kind of real expertise and are part of the solution. And there's real diversity of thought. If you speak to young people, I mean, a bunch of us can turn a Word document into a PDF. I don't know how many bosses of ours can do that. And then the other part is the advocacy part of it, where we put pressure on incumbent leadership to push the climate agenda forward. Obviously, all of us are big climate advocates, and we care about the solution. And then the third one is like innovation and entrepreneurship, where young people are creating a lot of solutions. So there's 3 big priorities.
Thank you for that, and I appreciate the diversity of points, the diversity of thought points.
Just
Go ahead.
Quick, 15 seconds.
Okay.
Energy is a public good. If you just think of energy access for women, it's, firstly, it's a security issue for women. It's a education, it has an impact on education outcomes. It has an impact on health outcomes. And so energy is so critical, for women in our society, that you can't just look at it as, sort of energy when people talk about only clean cooking or that kind of thing. It has an impact in sort of like a 360, and I think it's important to really re-emphasize that point.
Yes, I love that intervention, and now I'm going to bring in David to support the other side of this. Energy is a business. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. I'll try to put my thoughts in a couple seconds. Energy is a business, and it must be paid for. How it's being paid for, the model or the mix will decide. But we have always deployed, especially renewable energy and last mile energy access, with just the intention that, these people need light. We have deployed projects in communities where people were saying that, my life was great before your electricity came, and I would not lose my life if I don't have electricity. So what do you do in that kind of situation? So we need to be intentional about deploying energy access in a way and manner that impacts on how people make money. If energy access is provided in a way that impacts on how you earn, then it's not just a social good. It's literally the bridge between livelihood and poverty, right? So as we just try to think around all of this, energy access is a business. But, of course, there can be subsidization. Some more commercial areas can tend to cover the cost for some more rural areas. But at the end of the day, it has to be treated in a bankable manner. I give you practical examples. In some rural communities that we've deployed, for example, some mini-grid solutions, you have a situation where in the main cities, from the grid utility, the tariff is about, say, $1. In these communities, they are paying up to $3. But why? Because the way and manner, instead of ensuring that an agro farmer, for example, maybe you farm rice, instead of just having to sell it as paddy, we have agro mills that are done within these communities, which give this for example, like a rice farmer, 3x, 4x, 5x, much more value that he would have gotten. He wouldn't have gotten that value without access to a level of investment in electricity and also productive use agro-processing. So for me, the whole idea is, as we think about this commodity of energy access, how can we ensure that in its deployment and implementation, it is impacting on the way people earn? Because if it is done rightly, and I'm speaking from series and series of experience, if it's done rightly, even those people that you think that are underprivileged will become millionaires and will be much more richer and taken out of the poverty line. So that's the contribution I would like to make.
Yeah, I think I've gotten your point. You're saying that we should monetize energy, and that way we should give access to those who are underprivileged to allow them to benefit from it as well as a point on that energy is currently a business, but it shouldn't be a business. It should be a right. I think that sums up your perspective, and I think that's...
What I'm saying is, when you look at a commodity, there's a cost of production, right? And regardless, it has to make economic sense. If we're having like an interconnected grid solution or whatever sort of model it is, in some situations you have a decentralized solution. But regardless of the offtake, you need to be able to ensure that before, for example, how do we do mini grids in where I work? We would first of all have done an enumeration. How much do people earn normally? But you would discover that if people, for example, earn about $100 every month, you can provide energy access in a way and manner that it impacts on the economic activity. Because even those rural people, you have communities where people, for example, are just dairy farmers. They milk their cows and they sell the milk. But you know that if you sell the milk in days where this milk is not, for example, sold on time, they have lost value. But when there's access to cold storage, you increase the shelf life. They don't have to sell their product for cheap. So all of these economic factors, what I'm trying to say at the end of the day is, energy should be deployed with the intention to improve how people earn. Productive use. That's one of the things that a lot of people say that are productive, but that is the key point.
Thank you for that clarification, David. And I think to just close off this line of thought, I'll invite Anne for just some comments on that, in addition to some comments on how inclusivity is being done right in some other countries, in some other institutions, and what strategies you've seen in your experience. So 2 prompts, 1 minute. Make it work.
So, I don't know, maybe I'll just answer my own question. Okay, but I'll try. So gender is about power, it's about relationships between men and women, it's about a bunch of other dynamics within market systems. And the market systems have been influenced by historical issues. And we know one of the things we need to think about within this context is the geopolitics at the moment, the climate crisis and the debt dispensation that we found ourselves in. So it's important to look at us within this particular place and see whether can energy ever be a public good when we're thinking about some of these things, when we don't understand the geopolitics and when we position ourselves as having energy, marketing ourselves as energy being, this business, this lucrative kind of business, coming up with the green hydrogen plants and things like those. No, so I think the geopolitics are the structural geopolitics are worrying. The inequalities that are structural are worrying, and if we don't deal with them, and if we start thinking about market-based solutions for a system that's not working for Africa to begin with, I think we're going to have problems.
That's an amazing response, and that we may want to have it be a free-for-all market, but the system is not equitable. The system is not equal enough to allow people to access it the same, because there are some barriers that exist, and I hope you can hear me. There are some barriers that exist, and these barriers prevent some people from accessing the market. Thank you so much. And maybe speaking on barriers, maybe I can bring you, Esther, to talk about some of the barriers that exist, not just in access to the market, but also access to education by the community.
Thank you, Iman. I'm pleased to be part of this panel. I see they are well educated, even as we speak about education. I'll probably not say about barriers because we can list them and the list can be endless, but we need to come up with solutions to see how education can be given to other people so that they can also be part of this panel and they can be able to have that knowledge, because I'm sure everyone here in this panel was not taught about climate change or sustainable energy in their primary schools or secondary. It's an interest that probably came up in university or something of that sort. So even as we try to overcome these barriers in ensuring everyone is educated on sustainable energy development, some of my key points will be to harness partnerships within the public and private sectors, create collaborations, enhance communication, track issues and trends, see how this can be informally related and how it can be formally related in classrooms. I want to appreciate, I know SDG 7 Youth Constituency developed the children, I was part of that. I think that's where I met Percy. The children understanding of renewable energy, they also contributed to the I Act. We have the UNFCCC, they have courses online, and I always task myself as a youth and task everyone here, if you can disseminate this information to someone where they can get these courses, even on climate finance. I know the UNFCCC LAN has something on climate finance, so if he says something on green bonds, it hit my head, like I know something about it. So let's also learn, be champions to disseminate this information, act on mobilizing resources and monitoring progress. And with this education, it creates a change of attitude, and this attitude is what we need for the future in terms of achieving our goals in SDG 7 and SDG 13, and obviously 2050, maybe in reducing the carbon emissions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for focusing on the solutions as opposed to the barriers that exist. But I do insist on harping on the barriers, so maybe I can ask Collins, what are the barriers that exist, and what are your solutions in terms of climate financing and channeling these finance flows to the continent, and how can we make ourselves more attractive?
No, I mean, some of the barriers that exist within the African continent that hinder some sort of investment in the renewable energy, sustainable renewable energy venture, I think is all to do with probably policies, regulations, and institutional frameworks. And this probably, having been in the continent, working with certain countries, you realize that certain policies are not so pro investment in the renewable energy space, especially the regulations they are really wanting. The other thing that really, and we can talk about the policies and regulations and institutional frameworks and how we can be able to make it better. The other challenge that is really is out there, especially in the LDCs, is the size and potential of renewable energy in these particular countries. So for instance, if you went to an LDC and probably asked them about what is the size and potential of your solar, for instance, there's a likelihood that you might not, and I'm not discriminating LDCs, I'm sorry. It's just that particular data is kind of missing, and I think it's needed to be able to shape investments in the continent. The other thing that is also kind of somewhat missing is the direction in terms of, if I wanted to invest, where do I need to invest? And this is clearer indices, because you realize they lump up renewable energy in one. And so you don't have energy potential listed within the NDCs that we need to invest in this, and it's going to cost this amount of money. So I think those three could be my key challenges to investment. But we can make ourselves attractive in these particular areas by trying to size and situate, trying to develop proper policies, and sizing and situating is probably looking at what is the potential of renewable energy, for instance, in the coastal counties of Kenya, modeling that and being able to have a discussion with the donor partners and development partners for investment. Yeah.
Thank you for those tips. They're very, very pertinent, and I think we have come to the end of this panel. Thank you all so much for educating us, for walking us through this journey of why renewable energy is more important than fossil fuel, how we should invest in this, and how we should educate the youth and make sure that there's inclusivity in the sector. I want to thank you all so much for taking the time, for being so well-educated, well-spoken, and for engaging in such a wonderful discourse. And thank you all for taking the time to listen to the panelists. And now I'm going to release you. Thank you so much. Round of applause, please. No problem. And now I'm going to hand over to Pasi because I'm very cognizant that we're running out of time. So Pasi, if you would take it away, thank you so much.
Right, I mean, we've had some interesting things on the panel and some interesting quotes, actually. So at this very moment, I want to check how many comments and questions do we have on the floor following that discussion? One? Any other? Okay, great. Because we only have one. We have discussants. We suspected that you might feel shy to give comments or questions following that panel. So we invited special discussants to react to what they were hearing on the panel. So our first discussant, I'm going to call her up, Elizabeth Kulukulu. She is from Zimbabwe, and she's a director at the Africa Youth Initiative on Climate Change, but she also wears very many hats, and she has had the incredible experience of sitting in a lot of side events and panels during the just concluded Africa Climate Week and Africa Climate Summit. So just give us a reaction, Elizabeth, on what you've had on the panel, and also what your perspectives are on the future of the energy system in Africa from your perspective. Thanks, Liz.
Thank you so much. Good evening. I won't take much time, don't worry. But you know, as I was listening to the panelists, it was an amazing session, by the way. Thank you so much. As I was listening to them, I think what I've been hearing in the conferences, the summit, the climate week, everyone is saying young people are energetic. Young people have the innovations, right? Everyone is saying, oh, young people, we need to include young people because they are good at information dissemination. They are good at, climate change awareness. And it's something that I also heard on this panel. Okay, we know that, but how can we actually put young people in this whole equation? We know all that young people are innovative. We know young people can support with innovations, etc. and stuff, right? But how are young people coming into the equation? Everyone can do information dissemination as far as renewable energy is concerned. But what are we doing about it? I just want to, someone mentioned about the geopolitical economy, how the ground is not fair, right? And some people actually enjoying the status quo. I think if we really want to make sure that young people are actually doing something that is meaningful besides information dissemination, besides being recognized as people with energy, innovations, it all has to start from policy. We need to change our policies. There is need for reforms when it comes to renewable energy. Our policies need to be reformed. It's only through policies that we can meaningfully engage young people within the whole energy value chain. Someone was talking about energy as a business. Some people were also mentioning that, oh no, young people can, I mean, some of these things, they are really not practical from where I'm coming from, honestly speaking. If a young person just gets into this house and hear this conversation, it's very difficult for them to go and implement on the ground because it seems as if it's not realistic. We need to bring it down to a situation whereby a young person gets in this room, hears the discussions that are happening, feels empowered to go and do something. So I think if we want to change how young people think, change starts from the mindset. So it means my mindset has to change, Your mindset has to change. Let's come up with young people that are good at policy. Let them teach them how they need to contribute into policy. Then once young people understand their role into policy, let's have another group of people that are good at implementation, right? If it means to come up with mentors that are going to support them, let's do that, because I think mentorship is also another important thing in the renewable energy sector. Who is going to mentor who? There are a lot of job opportunities. Actually, in my country, they realized that a lot of job opportunities, starting by 2030 going forward, they'll be in the hydroelectric sector, in the hydrogen sector. But unfortunately, these job opportunities, they cannot refer to them as green job opportunities, right? Do you know the reasons why? It's because we do not have the skills, so they are going to import labor from other countries. So it's not even called as a green job opportunity because we are going to import skills. And those skills, we need to start building them now, right? Because if we don't do that, it means that by 2030, it will just show that, oh, we're just a generation that talked but failed to plan. So we have the power, we have the capacity to change the way we do things. It just takes a few minutes to change the way you think about a certain issue, right? So I'm not gonna say much, like I said. I just hope we can do things differently. That's my hope. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lizzie. I always say, when you're thinking about the future of something, you have to think about the next generation of leaders, experts, and people who will be facilitating those futures that we're trying to build now. And I think that's why youth and children keep coming up. I want to call our next discussant, just for a few minutes, as Jules prepares a nice performance for us before we move into the last segment for the evening. I want to call Howard Mwesigwa. He's from Uganda, and he's a UN SDGs Global Youth Ambassador, but he also wears a very parliamentary hat. So he's going to move away from the whole youth discussion, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about the education for sustainable energy transition in Africa and touch on finance. And as he's coming up to the podium, there's something interesting that nobody has touched on. So an interesting initiative was launched during the Africa Climate Summit and Africa Climate Week, and it was the Africa Carbon Markets Initiative. Now, we've seen a lot of people reacting to this online. Some have called it a wolf in sheep's clothing. Some have called it a pollution permit. Some have called it an imaginary commodity created to benefit the wealthy and not the climate. So as Howard is giving his remarks, and as I will be giving the mic to one more person in the audience, I hope one more person will be willing to comment on this. And if you're not there, I will choose someone. So Howard, over to you.
Okay, passive avoidance of doubt. I'd like to find out from you how much time I have, because I deal with politicians, so they could have wrapped off me. 2 minutes, okay. I'll use 2.5 just for living, yeah? Okay, so good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Howard Mwesigwa, and as Pasi rightly mentioned, I am the UN SDGs ambassador, again, from Uganda. But when I'm not doing that at the local level, I'm a youth member of parliament with the East African Youth Parliament, but I'm also the executive director of the Youth Environment Defenders Uganda. And I'm an ardent member of the SG7 constituency, so seeing David Arinze here made me feel at home, but I've also interacted with Esther as well. But I have a few comments again on what Richard submitted and Anne, and I'd just like to but to sort of combine the discussion on education, for the sustainable energy transition, but also financing. And let me begin with financing, which I'm more passionate about, because we could have all these conversations, but again, inclined to the credence that without the requisite financing, we'll only stop at the talk. And realize that, again, drawing from the Africa Climate Summit and the week, climate finance has been such a critical, labs for the conversation. And I had the opportunity of addressing Al Jazeera recently, and I felt it was very important for us to be honest. We need a new international climate finance infrastructure architecture, again, to fit the African needs, which are largely adaptation, really. So on the education, again, based on the work that I do, when we talk about education, many many a time we envision education for young people or the youth, yeah? But you'll be surprised at how many, again, policymakers in Africa, or even East Africa, where I have more knowledge, do not understand what you mean by the green transition or the sustainable energy transition, and yet they're the same people making policies. You see? So in addition to what my sister Esther submitted, I think that because the SG7 constituency and many international organizations have developed toolkits, and toolkits aiming, again, looking at the constituents of young people, children and youth, yeah? But the children and youth do not necessarily make policies. We try our best to influence policy, but the actual makers of policy are the policy makers, yeah? So, for example, if we can have a conversation on how we can come up with a toolkit for parliamentarians, yeah, on the sustainable energy transition, and we envision a society where we engage parliamentarians or lawmakers in these African nations, even at the Pan-African level, on the sustainable energy transition. That's very important to understand. On financing, we note that, again, the statistics from the International Energy Agency speak the fact that going from last year, about $381 billion were invested globally in the sustainable energy transition. But only 13 billion of that came to Africa. And 13 billion of that should be, if my math doesn't fail me, as it always does, it should be about 3-4%, yeah, of that. And yet we have 60% of the global renewable energy assets here in Africa, and that you know very well, right? But why aren't we attracting the right financing? And I think that now takes me back to what Richard was talking about. We need to de-risk, yeah, the renewable energy sector in Africa. But before we do that, because we understand that we can't leave this burden to the government. Again, as principal duty bearers, we could easily be tempted to recede it to government, but we can't do that. So that takes me back to what Esther was submitting on the public-private partnerships. But how do we incentivize the private sector to meaningfully come on board? Because as David was mentioning that energy is a business. As far as we might look at it, or as much as we might look at it as a public good or a social good, it is in part, but in the other part, it is also a business. So how do we de-risk the sector, but also incentivize the private sector to be fully on board? So as I come to a conclusion, I see Percy standing up. I think that on education, my intervention is that we should not only look at children and youth. We should also be very intentional with the policymakers. I deal with them, and I know that the power actually does lie with the policymakers. So if you can come up with a toolkit for policymakers, particularly parliamentarians, that would be a good intervention. And financing, we need to focus on de-risking, but also incentivizing the private sector. So thank you so much for your kind attention. God bless you all.
Every time that we get an opportunity to say what is true, we do that. And just have a few comments, as well as also extend a hand to what we could do together with all the people who are around. First of all, I think you noted that we were invited like we would be given 2 hours to talk, but we only have 2 minutes. We will abide to that. So, but just because of, we don't have all that time, and I think we had been given a chance to respond to, or to ask questions. I will not require answers, but I just want them to be in the mind of the people who are discussing. And I had someone say, I can't remember the name exactly, but I was trying to check. But he will remember, is the cost of power really becoming expensive because of increase in domestic connectivity? And that is not true, because we know the cost of power is becoming more expensive because of the government imposing unnecessary costs as a result of fuel generation, which is only 12% in the country, yet 45% is going to fuel costs and IPPs. And I can tell you, I saw the book that has been published, and it says on page 127 that 70% is what goes to consumption. That is not true. It's only between 50 and 55, and in some instances it is less than 50. So the data on page 127, 191, and 196 is not true as far as the society is concerned. We are ready to give the correct data. Esther said that they are funding a lot of education, but we were wondering, what exactly is this education and who are given the opportunity to train the society or the citizenry, because we do that many times, and I know we are supposed to be going to the US next month. We are going to Colorado, in Denver, and Wisconsin, and we are going to look for donors as a society so that we can extend the public education to media, radios, and all those things. Things that instead of saying Omo inaosha, inangarisha, and all that, we will say, why are you getting more tokens than your neighbor who is just next door? And I'm sure even the people in this room cannot maybe explain that. I appreciate that we have other people from different other countries, but we have a problem in this country. Anne said that they are financing civil societies. I would just have wanted to hear, even on the side, which societies have they funded for either education, what was the outcome, and what is their plan now that Kenyans are in darkness in terms of awareness in power cost. We increased the connectivity from 25%, and now we are at 76.5%. So we have a group of about more than 50% who have no idea what is power costing. Then, almost lastly, we have heard about SDG number 7, which we are also following very much on affordability of power and access. But now you ask yourself, every time we have to do voluntary national review, what is written on the SDG number 7? They always write some funny things that we have now decided to be paying power using mobile phones. Then you wonder, is that really what the SDG was aimed at doing? And so you have to ask yourself, are we even responding to what is required by the UN Sustainable Development Goal document? So I think on that front, the civil society should have been consulted. And I think there is no civil society that had fronted themselves strongly as possible. And so we should also be enjoined in the committee that looks at that particularly. Lastly, why did we go to court as a society to take Kenya Power in court, EPRA, and the Attorney General in the government of Kenya? It's because we thought that the public participation was not done to the thresholds required by the Constitution. As a result, they actually took the comments of the public, but the public were not commenting based on information. And so we thought public participation, you should be able to represent your argument because you are aware. Otherwise, most people did not understand what was happening, and as a result, we went to court. And I think that is what a civil society should do. Anybody who is willing to partner with a civil society that is ready to show results. We don't need to go to the US to get funding. If you people are around here, I think it's time we need to open a discussion so that you can be able to show your results. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Very important questions and comments. Anne, there was a question there for you. I hope you captured it. You did? Okay, so maybe that's a conversation you can have when we're having the cocktails. And then we will include those comments, questions, and discussions in the next Public Energy Futures Forum. There was one last question or comment as Julie prepares. Julie? So Julie, you'll just check with tech that the soundtrack is good as we get the final comment.
Hello, I'm Leslie Lulu. I'm an energy engineer. So I have some question and a comment. Somebody had mentioned on the mini-grids and how mini-grids plus the productive use of energy. So across the whole summit, there's something that had been advocated for, especially in terms of geopolitics in relation to women and children. People have been promoting the use of clean cooking for a long time, but then I don't know if the reason why they're promoting clean cooking is so that they can sell the clean cooking, or is it because they want a lot of women to have access to clean cooking? Because if you talk about clean cooking, for example, cocoa, that means that each of these women needs to have money to be able to access cocoa and to use it for cooking. But if you look at mini-grids and the larger, on a larger scale, if you have a mini-grid somewhere like, for example, Garissa or Jid Moyale, you have a solar mini-grid. That means they have access to energy. That means they can use the solar for for desalination, so they have access to water, so they don't have to move around in terms of looking for pasture and water, and some can even sell the water to get money, and and also the solars can be used for cooling sodas, water, and they can sell the soda to earn something. So it's like an economy by itself. So my question is, why is there so much, or why are women deemed to have or should, or why is there promotion of clean cooking amongst women really, instead of talking about the larger scale of access to or use of mini-grids? Thank you.
Yeah, just to react to her question. I also had the same question some time back, and someone told me the purpose of focusing on women is because women mostly are found in the kitchen. And also just to comment, there are studies that have been done to show that the price of using wood fuel or is higher than using e-cooking or using cleaner fuels. So that's why probably you see the push for electric cooking. There are studies by MEX, there are studies by BAN that show how effective e-cooking and clean cooking is than wood fuel, and actually it's a cheaper mode. And also to react with regards to public education, unfortunately I specialize in youth education, but it's something I would like to build on educating citizens. And even as my colleague said, I think we need to actually have a toolkit for policy makers. I was engaging with a policy maker recently who has brought an issue to Parliament on the electricity bill for Kenya, and there was some aspects that you could see probably she was lacking with regards to the new policies that are coming up and climate and laws that are there. So I think those are very insightful comments that were given. Thank you so much for that session.
Thank you, Esther. So, hi, everyone. Hello. Hi. It's in meetings like this that we see change coming. So just tell your neighbor you are the future. I can't hear you. Tell your neighbor you are the future. And also tell yourself, I am the future. Oh, my name is Julie Aol Onyango, also known as Jules Poetry. And I'm a spoken word artist and a poet. And today I'm going to do a piece entitled A Snapshot of Africa's Future.
Hi everyone, me again. So I'm just going to divide you guys into groups so that we can do a quick exercise, a quick visioning exercise. I'll explain how to do it, and then we can get started. We have a very short amount of time, so again, I'll be a very benevolent dictator in terms of time. So we are supposed to have 4 different groups for the exercise. And so those 4 different groups will be, these 2 tables will be one group. So you guys are Team Utopia. I'll explain later. The next 2 groups, you guys are Team Dystopia. You'll form one group, so you can converge on that last table. These 2 can converge on this last table. Cool? And then we have these 2 tables. You guys will be Team Business as Usual. Ominous, I know. So you guys will form another group, and you'll converge at that last table for your discussions. And lastly, we have Team Bizarre, which is my personal favorite, and you'll understand why. Those last 2 tables will form a group at the corner, at the last table together. Great, okay. So as I see, everyone has understood, and I hope Julie is ready to go. She's not. I'll use more of her time then. So I'll explain my exercise while we wait for Julie to do her performance. My exercise is a visioning exercise. Like I mentioned before, I am part of the Next Generation Foresight Practitioners. So foresight is a field that I've gotten into in the recent couple of years, and it's held my attention so much because it allows us to do some visioning activities to imagine the future, and then try and figure out what activities we need to do and what actionable steps we need to take to get to the future that we want, and what actionable steps we should avoid, actually, to stop ourselves from getting to the future that we don't want. So the visioning exercise we're going to use today is called Scenarios Building and Backcasting. You don't need to remember the name, it's fine. I'll explain how it works. So we have a time period of 10 years. but we're going to assume that the 10 years ends in 2030, because it's a nice, easy number to remember. So you imagine it's 2030, and you've woken up for some reason from a very long nap, and it's 2030, and you're looking around and you're focusing on energy issues. So these two groups, which is Team Utopia, I want you guys to imagine in 10 years what an energy utopia would look like for Africa. So you've woken up in the year 2030, you look around, what do you see that would be the best possible outcome in terms of energy issues in Africa? And then I want you guys to put that as a scenario, and then figure out what steps were taken to get there. So steps in terms of policy, steps in terms of legislation, behavioral changes at a regional level, at a national level. What was done to get to the best possible outcomes for energy issues in Africa? I hope you've understood. Great, I see some nods. That makes me very happy. And it's okay to be a bit confused, because as we talk amongst each other, we'll get to work out some of the kinks. So the next group, which is Team Dystopia, you guys have a very interesting task. You're supposed to figure out what is the worst possible outcome in 2030 in energy issues. Every single thing we did wrong, write it down. And what was the outcome of that? So you have some stickies on the table, you have some markers, and we'll give you one of those large papers to stick your stickies on. So what did we do wrong as a continent? What did we do wrong as a region, as various nations in Africa, to arrive at the worst possible outcome for ourselves in terms of energy issues? Cool? Thank you. Then we have Team Business as Usual. Your task may not be as fun as the other two, because you're using what already exists, business as usual. If we continue on the current trajectory, we continue doing what we're doing, we continue behaving the way we are, where will we end up in 2030? What will be the outcome of our current actions, our current legislation, our current behavior from now to the year 2030? Write those down. What steps have we taken? What policies are we continuing to do? What behaviors are we continuing to do? What technology are we continuing to implement between now and 2030? Write those down, put them on the paper, and what actionable steps are we taking along the way? Great, perfect. Lastly, we have Team Bizarre, which is where I'll be moderating. Here we do something very interesting. We try and figure out what happens if the unexpected happens. So for a lot of people, COVID was a very unexpected thing. It was a very bizarre thing that they didn't see coming. It just sort of happened to us, and then we had to deal with it. And so there was no way to have predicted it. Well, some people did predict, but it was out of the blue happening. So I want you guys to imagine random acts that will come and disrupt the energy system in Africa between now and 2030, and what the outcome of that will be. So be as creative as possible, be as disruptive as possible, be as unique in your thinking as possible, and write those down and put them on the pages that you'll be given, and then we can have a discussion. And for all of this, we have 25 minutes. Again, time is an issue. So before we start that exercise, I'll hand over to Jules one more time. Julie, before we can get into the groups and do the exercise. Julie, I hope you're good to go. Cool. Go ahead.
Look beyond the horizon. Sing afar, the day went right. To rewrite our history, we focus our attention towards a vision so bright. 1,000 years of darkness. Africa turns at last from out of centuries' blight of labor, moan, and dull oppression might. Capture the moment. Standing upright like an army ready to fight, moving forward and upwards towards the beam of light. Look beyond the mighty walls, the challenges that make our economy falls, the challenges of poverty, diseases, hunger, and all the misery they brought. This is the time to concentrate on the highlights of the Sustainable Development Goals, the blueprint and master plan of transforming the future of Africa and beyond. Capture the moment. Behold a snapshot of what the future holds. Africa, a land of greatness, a tale that will forever be told. So let's minimize the talk about Africa's misery but rather speak about the great opportunities. Talk less about Africa's recognized poverty, but rather cook up a brand of prosperity. Implement opportunities that can put Africa on a very different path of mankind's need and Africa's gloried paths. Capture the moment. See with the truth, O God, each doubting heart, and from the truth we shall never depart. Look beyond the guilt of I wish I knew. Capture the moment, get a new point of view. To see the diversity of its people in their rainbow shades, to feel their warmth, their love, and their big-heartedness. So if you've never been to Africa, don't believe everything showed to you. There's a better show behind the camera. When the news only headlines of violence, starvation in an Asian land of vast, capture not only these bad things, but capture the songs and happy stories the heartbeat of Africa's soul brings. So yes, we're blessed. Yes, our culture is intense. Yes, we will live in the present and not in the past tense. And yes, today we will speak. We will speak of the adjustments. We will speak of the generations that will benefit from the technological advancements, more investments, creation of employment, and the thrive towards development. Yes, so capture the moment. Capture the moment like a bird feeding its children in a nest. Capture the sun as it rises in the east and sets in the west. Yes, we will protect our environment, our wildlife, our cultural heritage. Yes, capture the moment. A future so colorful where every flag is in one union, united, mighty and powerful. So capture the moment, every minute of every hour. Hold the lens, zoom in, and you will see the future is ours. Hold the lens, zoom in, and you will definitely see the future is ours. See, I speak from the heart to enlighten your mind, and I share my thoughts to guide your heart. Jules' poetry, from heart to mind, from mind to heart. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julie, and I have no good segue to follow that, except to start trashing you guys again. So again, this is a very quick and very stripped down version of the tool. So please, any foresight experts, please bear with me. I know I'm making all of you cringe, but it's completely fine. We are very short on time. So please go into the groups as quickly as possible. And we have some facilitators, amazing facilitators. Mutsila will be taking the team on dystopia. Chia Gozie will be taking the team on utopia. Emily, who you've met before, will be taking the team on business as usual. And I'll be taking the team on bizarre scenarios. So please move as quickly as possible and let's get started. Thank you so much.
Quickly write what you think the future of your table is, and then we'll just put those up, and then we'll close the session. So we want to capture those moments and those thoughts in your head. So let's do this quickly, and then we'll close because our time is up. Which team are you? Okay. Give you a second. Okay. So do we do the report back first? Okay. Rapporteurs. The seats are yours. The seats are yours. I see you. Great. So those are two groups. Ude. NGFP Ude. Okay, great. We have a rapporteur from the Utopia group. Dystopia, we have our rapporteurs. Business as usual. Business as usual. You're in business. Now, wow. Facilitators. So the facilitators are from the NGFP Climate and Energy Futures Hub, which is a network of Next Generation Foresight Practitioners, and they're housed or hosted by the School of International Futures in partnership with the Society for International Development. So just a round of applause for the facilitators. Thank you for the good work. And now I want to hand over to our brilliant rapporteurs. Who wants to go first? Woohoo! Team Mutile, take it away.
Thank you, Pasi. So our group was discussing a dystopian future where everything goes wrong. We make all the terrible decisions that can possibly be made in the energy landscape of Kenya and Africa. So the scenarios we imagined were that we would have a lot of internal conflict, and this would rise out of the scarcity of resources. So essentially, this is driven by the need for profit over purpose, extractivism, just the essentials of capitalism determining everything we do in relation to energy. So once we completely exhaust our resources of coal, oil, whatever it is, then people start fighting to get these resources. We also imagined that the monopolies that exist in the energy landscape would continue, and therefore that means they determine the prices of energy. So we're not developing at all. That's a terrible scenario. Imagine you haven't developed from 1950 and you're in 2030 and you still have the same monopolies you've had for 80 years. Another scenario is that we don't develop into a 24-hour economy. So we are not moving beyond global south, third world status. We are staying there because we don't have the energy to drive these economies. And so one of the pathways to that would be we're not increasing our energy capacity. So we're not investing in renewable energy, we're not getting new ways to finance energy, and so we're staying at the same place. A final scenario is just continuing to increase the energy prices, which a lot of it is tied to energy poverty, and the pathway to achieving that would be an over-reliance on imported energy. So we already know that, perhaps not in Kenya exactly, but a lot of African countries rely on some imported energy. And this is obviously influenced by geopolitics. Like we just heard that the war in Ukraine has influenced energy, the COVID pandemic, all the supply chains for energy are affected by this. So the scenario is that just energy prices continue to rise.
Okay, thank you, Mutile. My name is Howard Mesigwa, and our team Mutile, and I'll be, again, just discussing the three other aspects in the 1 minute I've been given by Pasi. So that is energy poverty. So we know that energy poverty is really twofold. The first is the consideration of how much of the household income is spent on energy, or a scenario where households have to reduce or scale down on their energy utility or consumption to fit within the smaller budget that they have. So we see that being exacerbated, so an exacerbation in energy poverty in the world. but also we see the receding forest cover again as a result of the continued reliance on, for example, firewood. And we say that, for example, where I come from in Uganda, 80% of the population is in rural areas, and they rely entirely, when it comes to cooking especially, on firewood. And even those that are in the urban and peri-urban areas that, again, rely on charcoal. Charcoal is just an improved, really, version of firewood, but still contributes to a receding forest cover. So, and again, the results that draw from that is drought and the instabilities in the rain patterns. The last one we saw, again, realizing that at present, we have about, again, the pathway to that is reduced investment in renewable energy. And we note that at present, about $381 billion US, as I mentioned earlier, was spent as of last year on renewable energy deployment in the world, but only 13 billion of that, contributing to 3 to 4%, came to Africa, and we see that worsening. So as a result of that worsening, again, we're going to be seeing, we note that about 2.4 billion people globally do not have access to clean cooking. And so we know in Africa, for example, in Kenya here, 87.23% again of the electricity is renewable, that's hydropower, but the challenges when it comes to, again, reliance on unsafe or unsustainable energies in transport and in cooking. And we see that globally 2.4 billion people rely on unsustainable or unsafe cooking techniques, and we see that 4 out of 5 of those are in the global south. And so we see that worsening to a situation where it's 9 out of 10 or 8 out of 10. And so, and the ancillary health hazards that come with unsafe or unsustainable clean cooking techniques. So we see that worsening, and then with increased indices on the respiratory diseases and ancillary complications. So we see that worsening, and again, I think it was our job to imagine the worst, and I think we've done a good job being pessimistic.
Great. A round of applause. Check. Is this mic on? Okay, maybe not. So now we'll move on to the next one. So that was the team Dystopia. And just for those who don't remember, they were dealing with a constructive scenario where unchecked challenges dominate, leading to a difficult energy environment in the year 2030. Now, to contrast that, I'm going to call team Utopian. They were being facilitated by Chegozier. And they were focusing on the year is 2030, and the best possible outcome have been realized, emphasizing sustainability, accessibility, and innovation. So I'm going to invite our 2 rapporteurs. You have 3 minutes.
I'll be quick because, of course, we know we only have 3 minutes. I'll mention the scenario at which we would find ourselves in a very good situation in 2030, and we'll also mention how to get there. So first of all, we thought that there is a dream we could have where the cost of energy would be around below 5 US cents in Africa. That converts to around 6 shillings in Kenya. And so you multiply the same with the other currencies. To be the same in Africa, and that should be the cost, so that we are not tied by where we are investing. And then we thought that if we would have 70% of the energy consumed by industries, as opposed to what we have now, in most countries. After the connectivity, perhaps once we get that the energy consumed by industries is higher, that means that we also have work. Then the other one would be we want 100% renewable energy to the grid. And in Kenya, we have achieved to have 88% in generation. And so it's not something difficult. We know we have a geothermal potential of like 10,000 in Kenya, and we have only managed to utilize about 900, so we still have about 9,000 to go. We still have other areas where we can get coal. So, and we have a dam in DRC, Congo, which is 17 countries in Africa. We have a lot of uranium in Niger, which can also be used to power Africa instead of going to France. So it is actually very possible. Then we want the connectivity to be about 100% in the year 2030. We know some countries are trying. We know Morocco and Egypt are about 100%. But if you look like Niger, it's about 17%. You look at Burundi and Malawi, and all below 20%. So I think we need to pull up our socks so that we can even get investment to those countries because of getting power. So 100% connectivity of energy in Africa. And then we want 100%, we would dream to get 100% value addition of minerals. We have titanium in Kenya, which is imported as powder, and we know it's going to make sheets that are going to make aeroplanes. And we have paints. that are going to be imported. We had oil in Lake Turkana. We have been taking it out of the country to import it back. It is possible, actually, to have it refined in Kenya and we use it here without expecting other import duty and other costs. Will make the cost of power cheaper. And then we were thinking out of it, it would help in energy if we have a single currency in Africa, such that we would call it perhaps an African dollar. And we also have a single visa entry in Africa, such that it won't matter where you want to work, so that we can be able to export labor that is informed, either to Niger to go and do further connection. You could manage to go and do investment there instead of coming to Kenya, because there is uniformity in visa and currency. That would really improve in terms of energy access and all that. And then the energy democracy across Africa should be improved. And I think when we reach there and we find that actually that is what has happened by year 2030, we would be very grateful. Then there is the e-mobility. We are looking at 100%. I know the discussion around e-mobility is unfair to most of the people that I represent, because it's not fair to talk about e-mobility when even some people don't have cars. So they are just wondering, why are you worried? Maybe you could be talking of e-walking. E-walking would be better. So, I mean, it's not fair to start talking about e-mobility when some of us do not have cars. So I think the discussion is a bit skewed. It's for the bosses and not for everybody. Then we want to have reduced importation of energy in case we are and that mainly is on oil. Oil, we have a lot of oil in Nigeria, and so I don't think we need to go to Saudi Arabia as Kenya and East Africa to start go and importing from there. Otherwise, I think we are self-sufficient in terms of energy. How we get there, I think there are a few points, and I think I will rush through to see whether I will finish, and if he has something to say, he will add in a minute. But we want to say that to get there, we have to get productive use of energy, because when you have energy in the countryside or electricity connected to a certain grandmother, the only way they think is that they need to connect a radio and charge a phone and have a light. If there is a way that they can be educated on how they can use that energy to earn income from it, it would actually not, we would find ourselves not really trying to promote industrialization, because people themselves will be industrialized. And then we would be looking at if we could fund public education and awareness on how to use that energy for it to be actually an income to them. It would be better. And I think if we get more funding, and then we do that public forums to tell them, you have power in your house, this is what you can do, and you will get an extra coin. And then we'll look at incentivizing the use of energy in industries, such that you are not overcharging industries, because once they do production, they will still be taxed over the products that has been produced using power. So I mean, that instead of that double taxation, maybe they would find it better to be taxed once. If you have maybe one, you can add or two.
Thank you very much for so far about the policies. Now, the other thing we'd like to talk about is the policies. You realize that the policies that have been passed on in very many countries have been about how other countries from outside Africa will benefit, but now we need to have Afrocentric policies, whereby it is policies for Africa and by Africa. For instance, when we mine things like uranium, we should be able to price it the way you want. When we go to DRC, when we mine minerals there, we should be able to price the way we want, so that we can use the same resource to invest in our energy, so that it can power our continent. The other one is we need to invest. We need to invest in skill sets that are relevant to energy, that we need to invest in STEM education. The other one is that we can include metaverse and digital options in training, and also offer subsidy to futuristic energy projects, so that if someone is coming up with a project that is supposed to be used in the future, how do we support these projects? That has not been happening, and we hope that is something that if people have such projects, they need to be supported. Yes. The other one, I think, is we need to increase incentives in terms of tax. for people who want to implement energy projects. You realize that one of the challenges that has been happening, especially even in implementation of geothermal, is that being a very expensive venture, government has to come in and offer good incentives to those who want to invest, especially now that we want to become 100% renewable by 2030. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think that was a very positive report back. Like, I hope we get there, and we have like you said, we have the tools and resources to get there. My only personal opinion would, instead of calling the one currency for Africa the African dollar, why don't we consider the African shilling? But now we'll move on to Team Bizarre. And they're gonna report back on an unpredictable future considering wildcard events or drastic shifts that can transform the energy landscape. And they were being facilitated by Iman. So Azadi and Innocent.
Good evening, everyone. So after being charged with coming up with the wildest scenarios possible, number one, what happens when the global population is on a consumerism streak? The resources are not enough. Africa now becomes the source of everything that everyone needs. What happens then? A second scramble and partition happens for Africa's resources. What happens? Another scenario that's a little closer to home, World War III breaks out as a result of the Russian-Ukraine war. It spreads further south. Countries pledge alliances. What happens? Energy is heavily politicized. Resources run out. Countries are harboring the resources so that they can invest in the war. Interestingly enough, coming back to Africa, Africa turns into a global leader in terms of energy resources. There are visionary-led coups that happen. The African Union is in shambles. New leaders rise up. What happens then? Will the African countries come together? Will they split apart? Will different sects come up? What will happen then? And then closer to home, what happens, because currently there's a big divide in terms of gender roles, right? So what happens if the shift happened at this point? So what if all the leaders were now women? Would the energy transition change? Would we invest more in renewable energy sources? Would the status quo be maintained? What would happen? And then, what if, my personal favorite, what if benevolent hackers logged into the energy records, every national grid everywhere in Africa, yeah? Cancelled all power debt. The producers don't know who they're billing. The consumers don't know who they're paying to. The producers have to determine, are we going to provide energy for free and just hope that people will pay? Or are we going to just hold off and not receive any income until we figure it out? And then natural disasters. Wildfire breaks out across Europe. Half the population dies. Immediately, there's a lower energy demand. What happens to the markets? The exports that we send to Europe, what happens to them? Will we have to cancel those exports? What happens to the income from there? And then a tsunami, a massive tsunami, hits all of Africa. Obviously, we need the energy to rebuild. Where will that energy come from? Will we rely on current systems already established, or will we build new opportunities by focusing on the just energy transition? Now I hand over to my other facilitator to talk about the actionable steps.
Yeah, hey guys. After that scene setting, that bizarre scene setting, we came up with a few actionable steps. One being, we felt there was, or rather there would be a need to educate the public on equality, or rather a gender-sensitive approach to energy access. Second, touching on the scenario of hackers dealing with the details capture, of power consumers and so on, we felt that there will need to be an open source data so that other hackers can be able to assist us retrieve this information. We had also painted a scenario where the West will come to sort of get back the renewable energy sources that they've have been funding and projects in the continent. So we painted a picture where military chiefs across the continent will be able to unite and come together to protect these renewable energy resources. We also had an actionable step as investing in renewable energy resources as a continent, considering that we have a huge percentage of these resources, but then the investment does not match up. So we felt we'll be able to have a step in demanding equitable investing in these resources. Thank you.
Great. A round of applause for them. A very interesting way of reporting back. I love the storytelling, especially from Azadi. And I think that makes a very brilliant duo. Last but not least, the group that was going to dance for us at some point, Business as Usual, and the amazing rapporteurs on stage are going to be talking to us about projecting the future based on current trajectories reflecting a continuity of present-day strategies up to 2030. So ladies, take it away. You have 3 minutes.
Noted. So our group, the things we looked at are mostly negative. And it's because there's a lack of access to information. And then we talked about e-waste, and we talked about how this information is not trickling down to the communities. So I'll just read some of the things that we wrote, and then hopefully you understand me. So on e-waste problems, we saw a scenario where there's going to be a lot of e-waste, and then we don't have recycling plants. And we talked about how Rwanda has recycling plants, but then there's a problem of exporting the e-waste to other African countries. So that is an issue. And then because the development sector is very trendy, and we move with what is trendy at the moment. So we see a scenario where we'll keep moving to trends and not really working on what issues are currently there. Then we talked about technologies and assets will collapse. So because the current technologies that we have, the infrastructure that we have, cannot support our future. And our governments are not working on building this infrastructure. So we foresee a scenario where this will collapse, and then we'll have a problem. And then we talked about biomass. As much as biomass is looked at as a negative, we foresee a scenario where in the future, because energy, like electricity, is expensive. And so people will now start groups. Smaller players will come into the industry, and now people are having their own solar farms and the wind farms. So in the future, we see smaller players cropping up. I think that is all on that aspect. Rita will talk about the rest of the presentation.
Yes, after that, thank you so much. We were trying to see, having those scenarios in mind, if everything proceeds as it is, what would contribute to that kind of a scenario? What is currently existing in terms of policies that is contributing to whatever she has said? So the first thing is when we look at our leadership, there's lack of good leadership in the energy sector, and this will contribute to some of these negative issues that we have envisioned in the future. Something else is lack of policy, and this is I'm speaking towards the scenario on e-waste. So there's lack of policy on e-waste, both at the national and the regional level, and there's also a lack of tax incentives. Something else that would contribute to that is a lack of local financing. And there is also a lack of regional integration on policy to develop Africa as a hub for clean energy. And then something else I'd point out is the gatekeeping in the energy sector and development sector as a whole. So there's a lot of that that's currently happening right now that would contribute to an unpleasant future. And something that was actually very key in most of our discussions is a lack of knowledge and the knowledge trickling down to the community level. So there's a lack of knowledge sharing to the communities in a language that is understandable to them. Something else is there's a lack of alternative clean technology that is more affordable, and lack of affordable measures for the community level and at different sectors. This also makes it kind of hard to do a just energy transition in a way that is more desirable. I think that sums up the policy bit of what we had discussed. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You all have done an incredible job within such a short period of time. You can stay there if you want. We have a special guest. Actually, no. Leave the stage, so that we can all see and close together. So now we are closing the session. And to close the session for us, we have a special guest who's joining online, and he is going to do the closing remarks, and then Dauphin is going to do the last presentation or performance of the night. So I want to call Arthur Muliro. He's the Deputy Director General of SID and also the Acting Head of Office for the Regional Office for Africa. So Arthur, I invite you to give us the closing remarks. I hope you're there. Perfect.
Not sure whether that is good news or bad news, but once again, good evening to you all. Thank you very much, Pasi, and I appreciate that it is quite late at night in Nairobi. I'm not on the beach, and it is in addition because it's exceptionally hot where I am. It's still about 30 degrees. But this is part of, I think, some of the ecological transitions we are talking about, and the fact that the world is not behaving the way we're used to it behaving. And I was asked to say a few things about the dialogue you've had today, the issues that you raised, and I think listening to the scenarios the groups came up with, I think it's fantastic work. One level, I think it highlights the complexity of the challenge, the myriad options that one needs to weigh in order to try and reach options that are agreeable, acceptable, affordable, and all that. But I'd just like to say maybe 3 or 4 things before I wrap this up. And I think in you guys having had this conversation, I think one thing that has stood out, I think, is the fact that we are at the moment in inevitability. We have to do something. We cannot continue to imagine that a transition of one form or another will not happen. I think we're clearly seeing the limits of the hydrocarbon era. It's unsettling, and the question is what is going to come in its place. And there are those of us who are convinced and committed to trying to work that the future is clean, sustainable, renewable, but that also it is accessible and affordable. In all of this, I think what we ought not to forget is the fact that energy justice and energy poverty have been very much the two accompanying orphans, if you like, of the current energy system. So we need to sort of think through these things in terms of making sure that the people who do not have access to clean energy, particularly in the rural areas, but not only, can have access to it. And when we do last mile projects, that the people who are connected can actually afford the energy, so that they can enjoy the benefits of this energy system. So I think the questions, and you've been dealing with some of these things in the conversation, how are we going to organize this new energy system? And I think there are very, very many critical questions there. And certainly I think the whole challenge of whether this should be a privatized system as opposed to looking at energy as a public good is a debate that I think still needs to be exhausted. We've also alluded to the fact that these are not issues that we can of necessity deal with within our national boundary. There's geopolitics involved, there are political economies that are involved that span or have impact beyond our national boundaries. So we're talking about international issues, and in any respect, I think the responses are not going to be mere from our own countries, but of necessity from a larger footprint. So lots of difficult questions. I think questions around which system we're going to adopt, who is going to pay for it, what sort of timelines. Do we assume that the clean system is going to evolve over the next 50, 60, 100 years or shorter? I think these are things that we need to struggle with. And even as we do that, I think we need to keep the question at the back of our minds is that we are producing this energy for what? I think at the simplest, yes, we want our wives, our mothers, our grandmothers to not to suffer the smoke of charcoal jikos. But I think it's also about what sort of economic models and what sort of production structures we want to put in place. We keep talking in Africa about economic renewal, about reviving our economies. What is the role of the energy system in this? And even as we're doing that, are we thinking of having economic systems that actually are integrated with the production models that are in place? So if we are mostly rural and agrarian countries, how are the energy systems we are putting in place supporting those production and survival structures at that level? Or are we just simply assuming that the clean energy is for those of us who live in the cities and because we all want to drive e-vehicles? I don't think so. So this is, in a sense, I think also a proxy for another conversation that needs to happen that is perhaps a much more profound conversation, which is, so what is our economic model going to be for the future? Because of necessity, once you sort that out, then I think the energy comes to that and to support it. And herewith, I think you see also then the value of foresight. You've had an opportunity this evening to play a little bit with some quick and dirty scenarios. And I think you can see the options, the challenges that come with that, but also in a sense, the joy of trying to explore the future. And I think anticipating is one thing we're trying to do by getting people to think about what are the scenarios of the future using foresight. These are stories that can also encourage us to speak to one another, to try and understand where we're coming from, what are our interests, what are our hopes, what are our fears, but also to learn from one another in terms of what is working and who is doing what. But above all, I think working with foresight means that we want to have a commitment to learning and a commitment to a process that is incremental, that encourages us to explore the best in one another, even though things might be unraveling around us. So I think this is, in a nutshell, the role that we as SID are committed to do. I think one is to create spaces that encourage these sorts of conversations that many of you have stayed until this hour. I think is a testament to the value that you have seen and obtained from being part of this. Second thing I think is that by also bringing people from different backgrounds, different life experiences, we are trying to create platforms through which you can share knowledge, you can exchange ideas, and begin to push the boundaries of what is possible. The whole idea is that we want to imagine a different outcome than the present. So it's not so much business as usual. There are those of us who might be invested in business as usual, but the only thing that we know is that change is inevitable, and therefore business as usual cannot be a strategy for surviving in the future. So I'd just like to say on behalf of my colleagues, thank you very much for having spent this Friday evening with us.
exploring the options and opportunities in this regard. And a big thank you as well to my colleagues, Pasi, Crispus, Peter, Emily, Iman, and many others whom I may not know are present, who have helped to bring this together. Our colleagues from the NGFP, I think your contributions are noted and recognized. So it's been great, and I hope this is not an endpoint, but rather beginning of an ongoing engagement as we explore what we can do around rethinking a new energy system for us. Thank you very much. Have a good evening and all the best. Pasi.
Asante sana. Thank you, Arthur, for those incredible closing remarks. And I think there's been a lot to pick up from your summary of the entire discussion. From me is to thank all the participants that came out, including the participants from different parts of the continent. It has been a pleasure having you in Nairobi the whole week for the Africa Climate Summit and the Africa Climate Week, and your insights here have been incredible. And also for the colleagues in the country, we will continue to have this series in partnership with our partners, the Heinrich Boll Foundation, where we'll come for another Public Energy Futures Forum before the year closes, and we will continue this conversation with the hope that we will be plugging into influencing policy, energy choices in the country, and hopefully moving a step closer and closer to achieving that sustainable energy future that we desire for our country and for our continent. So with that, I want to say thank you. Before we officially close, I'm going to ask Dauphin to just come up. And as he's on his way, I'm being told to remind you not to pick up the publication that's in front of you. If you don't have it, it makes for an incredible read. We do appreciate feedback. A lot of the content there was developed by different researchers who are also members of the Energy Reference Group. The data was collected from different sources, and we really, really loved the feedback that we got today from our colleague that some of that data is inaccurate and needs to change. So those are the kind of feedback we want to hear back from you so that we can revise and improve the knowledge that we bring out. And last but not least, because I'm not going to come back to the mic, is there's still refreshments, drinks at the back of the room. So when we're done with the session, after Dauphin closes for us, please feel free to mingle, network, exchange contacts, and have a lovely week and a lovely night. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you. Thank you. I think for me, I'm grateful to be here because I feel like I've gained a lot of insight. Even as an artist, I feel like we need a lot of these insights, to be able to contribute to the foresight of these conversations, right? And you cannot talk about energy, and not talk about climate change, and especially, this particular week, it's been about Africa and climate change, and I think part of the big challenge is really like, how do you get people to understand what climate change is? Because it's like, if you do it in this way, most of the times, it's like you're trying to explain a vocabulary using another vocabulary and another vocabulary, and then in between, a lot of things get lost in translation. And so I was trying to imagine, like, what if climate change was a person, like, what would he or she have to say about themselves, like, and I was thinking, right, so it's like, behold, a dusk without dawn, a storm with no calm, a fire that rages on. That's me. I am the rains that never came, the seeds that never grew, the crops that failed. I am the countless cattle carcasses and the bare granary floors. I am the starving bodies of children in northeastern Kenya and the vulture hovering to pick their dried up flesh from their juvenile bones. I am the tears of mothers lost in grief and the fear that never stops. I am the famine, the drought, the heat wave, the melting roads of Valsad, India. I am the choking skies struggling for the next breath, and the weeping clouds in an outburst. I am the hurricane, the tsunami, the typhoon, the earthquake, the cyclone. I am the melting ice in the polar north and the perennial floods in Budalangi. I am disaster, an ever-impending catastrophe. Disaster. Who am I? I am the deserted marketplaces, the empty shelves, the recession, the food prices in the skyrocket. I am the truth in your empty pockets and the lies from your politicians' mouth. Hell, I am the propaganda minister. I am as mysterious as I am sinister. You call me trouble. When I move, the whole earth trembles. When I shake, entire cities crumble. It's no wonder I am the talk of town. As a matter of fact, scratch that. I am a global conversation. I am the president's speech and the rumor in your local bar. I am the gossip item, the prayer item. Your parish priest is in pilgrimage praying to stop me. I am a star. The devil knows my name. As a matter of fact, to some, the devil is my name. I am the wrath of the gods, the ghosts of 1984 in Korem, Ethiopia. I am the protests, the emergency meetings, the food drives, the road shows, the conferences. International conventions have been held in my name. Poems have been written, songs composed, pictures taken, paintings drawn. I am a hot theme in film. I've inspired documentaries, TV shows, and blockbusters. Can't you see? Somewhere today there's yet another event about me. And this is still another poem about me. I really am a big deal. I'm in your newspaper headlines and your prime news bulletins. I am the hot debate, the scientific puzzle, a cautionary tale, a warning. I am the last cock crowing before morning, or maybe not. I am a tumor, a malignant one, a terminal disease. My name is. Yeah, you can fill that in for yourself, because you are the cause of the cancer. I am the only question in your final exam, and your next action is the answer. Your next action is the answer. Thank you and good night.